Oh, these are some good ones. Be sure and read the comments in chat about annoying behaviors from neighbors. Uh, Looks like many of you are able to come up with something from loud parties to parking to BB guns and dogs, right? I see more people checking in. So it is about 12 noon. So we like to try and start as close as we can. But as you log in, if you have examples of habits that have made some of your neighbors really annoying or difficult, uh, feel free to share those in chat. That's really part of our topic today. And I'll just say welcome to Neighboring 101. This is the monthly program where we talk with leaders in the neighboring movement nationwide, and we discover ways for organizations and individuals to use these concepts of neighboring to improve themselves and to improve their community as well. I'm happy to say that this is our 2-year anniversary month right now. And so we've got classes lined up in the coming months all the way through September of 2023 into year 3. So thank you for being part of that and being faithful in attendance and learning more about neighboring together. I know many of you watch the recordings afterwards, and thank you for that as well. We now have 659 people registered in this class from all across the United States. My last count was we have 36 states represented in that registration list. Probably no surprise that there's a heavy concentration in Missouri, but other states are represented as well. So thank you for being part of that. I'm going to mention here at the beginning as well, I know we have some folks on that work with Habitat for Humanity. We've had some discussion about curriculum development that can be used with new homeowners, but I've had requests for other types of curriculum as well in neighbor settings. And I just want you to know we have something that we think is near a final format, and we're actually going to showcase that in June, July, and August. The June, July, and August sessions of Neighboring 101 will really be using that curriculum, sort of a train-the-trainer format that you can then turn around and use in your own neighborhoods or your own agencies or in Habitat specifically or other settings. So more on that in the future. I just didn't want anyone to think the ball had been dropped on that idea from last year. We're progressing forward. So please, chat's open. And then, of course, you can always unmute during the program if you have a question as well. That is fine as well. And I want to go ahead and get started so we have as much time for our guest today as possible. I want to introduce you to Bob Brozotta. Bob has been the managing editor and author and publicist for Neighboring Solutions, LLC, really since January of 2000, I believe. And he helps people who are seeking solutions in serious conflicts close to home. He authored this book that's worth buying if for no other reason than the title. Oops, it's fading out on me when I show it. It's Neighbors from Hell. Here we go. There's a better shot of it, I think. Neighbors from Hell is available on Amazon, and it's subtitled Managing Today's Brand of Conflict Close to Home. He's the author of that book, but he's also been a consultant for CNN and NPR, ABC, Wall Street Journal, a number of national newspapers and magazines that have covered topics related to neighbor relationships. He's certainly been an expert topic on that all over the world. He also worked with ABC News from 2005 to 2018. I know I've seen a couple of segments with him on it from 2020. And I think one of those even included a family from Missouri, as I recall, a cul-de-sac that he worked with. So certainly lots of experience in this area and lots of experience in dealing with boundary disputes and trash and loud cars and annoying kids and barking dogs and smokers and all sorts of other strange things. So Bob, thank you for joining us today from the East Coast, and we're so thrilled to have you and look forward to a great conversation today. Do we have you unmuted? Bob, you may still be
You may
muted.
still be muted.
There's,
All right, how is that?
that's good.
That's
we can
good.
hear
Now
you.
we can hear you.
Okay,
Great,
great,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Let me mute this one.
Oh, just one of them.
Just one of them.
There we go.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. How are you today?
It's
It's
always a challenge.
always a challenge
talking
talking
to Zoom,
to
right?
Zoom, right?
Yes.
I'm getting
I'm
a
getting
little echo on
Little
me.
echo on me.
You're the only
You're
other
the only other
person.
person.
All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can
fine.
hear you fine.
Okay, great. Hello,
Well,
everyone. How are you?
We're doing great.
We're doing great.
Thrilled that you
Thrilled
can
that
join
you
us.
can join us.
Great to meet you in
Great to
person.
meet you in
Like I said,
person.
I
Like I said, I
enjoyed
enjoyed
reading
reading your book.
Thank you.
and
And
hoping you can
I'm glad to
start
be
off
here.
by
start off by
telling us your
telling us
neighboring
your
state.
neighboring state.
Well, let's see. If I could choose one, and just as sort of like a sidebar, I was on Gail King's show years ago. She's just a very lovely person in person. And she introduced me by saying, well, Bob, you've had all these different neighbor from hell stories to tell. Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right, because it is, in the ear of the beholder, as I say, or the eye of the beholder in many cases. But my most recent neighbor issue was about 20 years ago. We moved in. We were on friendly terms with the lady next door. She had a dog that barked a lot, and that's kind of annoying. But the problem was at the time that she had her dogs barking at 2 o'clock in the morning in the backyard, right up at our bedroom window. And it was, the yappy. It doesn't matter if it's yappy or bellowing, whatever it is. If it's disturbing your sleep, sometimes you need to talk to that person. And in my case, we spoke about it. The first time she was like, oh, yeah, okay. And then I had to bring it up again, and she just sort of belted out a song, staring wildly at me into my eyes, belted out a song, because she was going through a lot of, I guess you could say, emotional problems, personal problems at the time. So she was not able to handle certain things. So that became a really difficult, painful experience over the years. I had already, though, been studying neighbor situations. I think probably when I was a reporter, I was covering various neighbor situations where at the Philadelphia Inquirer, I remember we had several meth houses that would catch on fire and drug houses that had people, going in and out at all hours. And of course, the noise and loud parties, vicious dogs, property lines, all of that stuff. I was covering it, and I never really had that kind of a problem before. But then once I did, I understood just how difficult these situations are. And that got me taking notes. And, this was, the internet was already around. And so I started something called neighborsfromhell.com. And it was really more of a message board than, a promotion for some hideous book I was going to be working on. I wanted to see if I was crazy or if other people were going through this. And it turns out I'm not so crazy. This stuff happens all the time. And really, it's one for the ages when you think about it. I mean, cavemen probably had problems with each other, conflict is something that is very naturally occurring because, you have your way, I have my way. It's really a matter of how the conflicts that can come up get resolved or not resolved. And, my experience was I made so many mistakes, and I thought, well, who has knowledge? And not too many. I mean, you have a class, neighboring, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we had that throughout grade school and high school, and well into life? So that's just something that you're thinking about all the time, rather than the situation where you find yourself really not knowing what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do. When do you call the police? When do you involve the landlord, the HOA? When do you decide to just move? When do you decide that my life is worth living in this place where I am right now? And so that's sort of like a combination of my neighbor story and how I came to write the book, because as I was helping other people, I found that I've got some good content here, because I, through all my, my own failures in trying to resolve things, I was learning and then teaching other people the better ways of handling things. I hope I'm still unmuted.
You are.
You are.
I'm still
echoing.
So I think I'm the problem. And I've messaged some questions, or I can message questions to you, Bob.
Sure. Well, I have a few questions that I had received from you in advance. Do you want to ask me those, or?
Yeah. We'll go with those. I was just trying to eliminate my echo.
I hope it's not on my end.
I think it's me.
Okay. Yeah, it says I'm muted and my sound is off.
Yeah, so it's me. Well, I'll add my first questions in chat. You can see those.
Yeah, I'm looking at, I don't have the chat up, but I have the questions that you had sent to me.
Same thing.
Same things.
Okay, so I think that the next one really to come up would be, you write in your book about a new good neighbor underclass. Can you explain that? Is that the question I should go with?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good neighbor underclass wasn't something that I was thinking of at first, but the more I learned about how people were being treated, and not only by a bad neighbor, but by the system that is really designed to protect a good neighbor, a good citizen. The system doesn't really serve the good neighbor. You can get away with an awful lot of unneighborly activity before police will do anything, before your landlord will do anything. There aren't a whole lot of drawbacks to being a bad neighbor. Whereas if you're a good neighbor and you're complaining about a bad neighbor, and again, we can get into, who's more complaint worthy, the person making the noise or the person who keeps complaining. You can talk about that all day. But I kept finding, and I still find it, that it's the person, the complainant, or often called the complaining person or complainer or whiner, that person is mistreated by a system designed to help. Maybe you can't solve all of my problems, but you certainly should not, if I've asked my neighbor 10 times to lower the music, I always go back to noise because it's probably the most common issue. And then finally I call the police. The police should not come over and treat me like I'm a problem because they've got bigger, fish to fry. And certainly the police do have an awful lot of hard work, and they don't like these neighbor dispute calls that they're often forced to show up for. But at the same time, they will treat the noisy neighbor in this case like, you're gonna have to turn it down because this guy's really, he's gonna keep calling us. And it's almost like there's this bond between, not always, but I find it quite often, a bond that forms between the noisy neighbor or otherwise problematic neighbor and the police or other authority, because, and this is where we get into the term underclass, we used to be, the pillars of the community, I guess you could say, the people who are good neighbors, good citizens. They're not bothering other people. They're taking care of others. They're just, they're good neighbors. And somehow we've fallen from that height to this underclass that, is considered whiny or annoying because we have a standard. It's not even that high a standard. We just, we need to sleep, or, we don't want your, water runoff coming, when you empty your pool into our basement. It's things like that. And the more I see people being treated badly because this is my cat. Sorry. the more I see people treated badly because they have a legitimate concern, the more I realize that we have fallen from that top spot into what I have to call an underclass, where, yeah, you're going to complain so much, why don't you move? Well, why? I mean, I have a legitimate concern about something. So it just seemed to me that it was a pretty dramatic fall in not too long a period of time. From, I don't know, maybe you could harken back to the great 1950s. I wasn't alive back then, but I hear, a neighbor was there to borrow a cup of sugar, and you had the barbecues, and everything was just, portrayed at least very pleasantly. It wasn't, I can tell you, in my research. And the good neighbor was really considered something good and important. And now, if you say to someone, hey, look, I have a problem, with this or that, then they immediately consider you to be an annoyance in their lives. Stay over there, son.
We love cats.
We love cats.
No, I love her to death. She loves to get in my shot. Sorry about that.
I know you have a
Please.
second account open with your cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
You think you could close
Yeah.
that out?
That might give us my echo.
Yeah, everything is completely turned off, but let me do that. And then if I wander out of camera, because that's the only way I can see myself, just, how do I get out? Leave meeting. Okay, I left that one. Is that helping at all?
Well, let's see.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
I think I may
I
still
think I may still have it.
Okay. Now I won't be able to see any of you, so just realize I'm looking into a camera eye on my keyboard of the Chromebook that I loaned to my son. If I might move along, or I can answer questions as we go, however you want to do it, David.
I suspect
I
others
suspect
can log in and ask
log in and ask questions
Okay.
without
Are there
the
any questions?
without the echo, maybe.
I was gonna say someone else talk because David or somebody, yeah, I'm echoing too.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure
because
what
of this.
cause of this.
Have not run into
I've not run into this
Bob.
before, Bob.
I'm sorry, the end of the question broke up.
I'm not sure that
I'm not sure that
asked the
April asked the question.
She just said
She just said she was
echoing as well.
echoing as well.
Oh, okay.
So sorry.
Sorry.
Handicap.
Like a handicap.
You do have
You
this
do have this
next question.
in the printout, I think, right?
Yes, moving right along. Question, you write that when it comes to neighbors, it is unfamiliarity that often breeds contempt. What are your ideas for becoming known among those who live near? And does it include being active in your neighborhood? So it's two questions. Let me answer the second part first. Yes, if you could be active in your community, that is terribly important because you become known. And as long as you're, a wonderful, person, and by wonderful, I just mean, average, decent, helpful, looking to help people solve any problems that they might have, then you're known in your community as that person. And to be known in a positive way is so very important. And then to go back to the first part, what do you do when you have, let's say, a new neighbor? And I found, and one of the most important things I discovered and wrote about in the book, just in research and in living, is that if your next door neighbor is someone that you know, and you're on a first name basis, and you'll occasionally chat, you don't have to be best friends, then when they have some people over and there's some music, it doesn't bother you as much because you have familiarity. You know who that person is. You know it's their kid's birthday. And, so the kid has, his kid friends over and, maybe my kid is even there. You know what I'm saying? So that familiarity is something that, was pretty much taken for granted for a very long time. And then it just sort of went away at some point. not in just one neighborhood. And certainly it hasn't gone away in all communities, thankfully. But just knowing who that person is and having met that person, having spoken with that person, it makes such a huge difference. I can tell you right now, I have new neighbors. They bought the house about a year ago, young couple in their 20s. So they're, they have lots of young friends and they like to have them over and they're going to play music in the backyard and stuff like that. And I think that in the past, I would have just waited and seen how things were going to go. But having gone through, a spell or so myself, and then, if I'm the ABC News good neighbor guy, I certainly don't want to be a bad neighbor at all. So I was really, it was important to me that I go over and get to know them just a little bit, not, but hey, how you doing? But introduce myself, welcome to the neighborhood. Anything we can do, let us know. And then, we met up a couple more times and, and then they had a housewarming and we were invited and, so we already have a good rapport just from not much effort at all. And therefore we have familiarity. On the other hand, his neighbor behind him actually is in an area that's a little raised. It's up a hill. And my neighbor, the new neighbor, Dave, was burning leaves, I think, which, you're not really supposed to, but, and the smoke was going up into his yard. Rather than, having already met Dave like me, that neighbor hadn't met him and he happens to be on town council. And rather than go over even to, the fence line and say, hey, excuse me, I've got all this smoke coming up here. Do you mind, putting that out? Because, my kids are playing or whatever. And Dave would have been, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, that's the reaction that people generally have. But instead of doing that, the councilman, who I don't even know, I'm not sure who it is, he called the local police. Police came by and he said, told my neighbors, what was what, and there was a complaint. And then they said, oh, okay. So they started to put it out. It didn't go out enough, so the police were called again. And my neighbor happens to be a police officer himself, just not right in this town. And, I felt bad for him because he was telling me about it afterwards. And I said, Dave, look, I know how you feel because I don't go around bragging to everybody who I am. I'm just Bob, not the writer of Neighbors from Hell. That's going to be a little bit off-putting to some neighbors, I think. So I just said, I know how you feel. And, if it bothered me, I would have just let you know because you and I know each other. I said, I really think that the guy should have just, come over and said, hey, listen, as I said, can you do something about all that smoke, the fire and everything? But he didn't. And I'd say it's about 50-50 chance that you're going to go through at some point in your life what my neighbor Dave went through. And at the same time, you could wind up being the guy up above him who was disturbed by something, but you didn't know your neighbor. So you didn't know him by name and you didn't want to have that as your first introduction. So you called in an authority or you filed a complaint or something like that. So that's sort of a long-winded answer to that question. Are there any questions before I move on?
I'll have to
I'll
try
have to try to check it.
but we are
But we are
handicapped.
handicapped.
And so sorry.
So sorry.
No, that's all right. When you speak, you break up a little bit on my end. I hope I'm not breaking up for everyone listening.
You are not.
Okay, good.
Well, I think you had an expression at the introduction of
your book.
Yes. Yeah, you enjoyed the introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, David. I share a theory in there that selfishness is eclipsing more neighborly attitudes. Can you explain? Someone I know put it pretty well when they said, as far as they're concerned, the world ends right here at the end of their nose. There is just nothing out there that is more important than they themselves. So they could never possibly be wrong. They could never possibly annoy anyone. They could never possibly do anything that would be, considered bothersome. They're bothered by everybody else in many cases. And I find that quite a bit. That something about, you could say that it was the advent of television that started to get us to be, more selfish. I would say definitely social media. I was a pioneer in social media. I was working on, chat rooms and message boards before Facebook and Twitter. In fact, that's how I got so much of my research done for this book. So I'm not going to bash technology, but certainly, the people that you see on these videos, my son is into TikTok and he likes watching them, it's entertaining, but they are so vacuous. And, compare that with, I'm not going to bash all of TikTok. I have no idea what's on TikTok except for what I witness in passing in my son's bedroom. But the vacuousness that you see on some of the reality TV shows, the social media posts, it's certainly annoying to me, but it clearly is not getting people to think more of each other and more of the world around them. And to think beyond themselves, to actually be empathetic. Empathy is increasingly dying a slow death, as far as I'm concerned. And what can we do about it? Man, sometimes I think if I could just tell my son, I'm constantly working, rowing upstream to change the attitudes that I see developing from him watching this stuff. And I don't mean it's so bad. It's not like horrible stuff. It's just that it somehow breeds in a young person a willingness to adapt that kind of attitude about how important I am and how, this is annoying to me and therefore it is annoying. You know what I'm saying? So I'm always trying to adjust his views, adjust his worldviews, really. And, I hope that other parents can do that. I wish that adults who are so involved with some of this stuff would realize what a giant waste of time it all is. I'm not saying it can't be entertaining, and it can be fun to, get likes and get shares and all of that. But I chose a long time ago, other than having a Facebook and Twitter account in order to sort of market the book, which came out many years ago. I'm just not on social media. It's just sort of an unpleasant place where everyone has to one-up you. Everyone's sort of bragging, sitting back at a lounge, holding a $30 cocktail, just, it's kind of silly stuff. And I'm not trying to judge. It's just that it can also get very nasty very fast. And I don't like that, even though, yes, I wrote a book about neighbor conflict and conflict resolution. I hate conflict. It is not my favorite thing. And there again is one of the points of the book, ways to avoid it. But thank you for that.
Or the
Most common
common
types.
types of neighbor.
That's our next
I'm
question.
That's our next question.
Yes, most common types of neighbor conflicts you see. Whenever interviewed early on, I would always say noise. It starts with noise. What I have found more recently is gossip, that there are people who don't have enough going on in their lives to, live a positive way. And so they become architects of gossip, I've come to call them. And that's not in the book because I hadn't really arrived at such a conclusion when I wrote the book. And they weave a very tangled web because it's distorted, it's dishonest. And I can tell you, for example, one of our neighbors used to go running with my wife, and they became friends, two women about the same age. And my wife would come home and say, "Boy, Jesse told me that such and such is such." And I was like, okay, what do you think she is now telling that person about you? And she thought, wait, yeah, that's true. And the more I saw of it, the more I realized that this kind of thing is happening all over the place, and social media there, amplifies that as well. The other thing, yeah, so we have noise, you have gossip. Increasingly, there are environmental issues, and in the book, I mentioned several things. Maybe your neighbor below you smokes cigarettes on the balcony, or the neighbor above you is watering plants on the balcony. You get it coming and going, up and down. Environmental stuff like that. I mentioned earlier, water runoff. People empty their pools, at the end of the season, and not all of them do it in a way that is responsible toward others. They'll just empty it into their yard, they think, not really thinking about the fact that your yard is downslope from theirs. But you name it, anything can get in the way of, neighbor community harmony. I've seen violence. And not as much in recent years, thankfully, but it was starting to get really bad in, I guess, the mid to late 20 teens, where people are shooting each other over leaf blowing and snow shoveling. And I was interviewed once when Rand Paul was attacked by his neighbor, and a lot of people thought it was politics. Maybe it was, I don't know. But it was essentially over landscaping, yard keep up, and stuff like that. At least that's what one of the narratives is. Politics is involved, so there's probably numerous ways that could go. But that, in a nutshell, is the kind of conflict that I'm seeing most. You ask, have I been able to offer assistance or mediation to people with neighbor conflicts? Yes, and that's really what I started out doing early on in building the book, helping people. I mean, really just one-on-one, one at a time, in order to, develop sort of a user guide, a manual to dealing with neighbor conflict, because conflict close to home has a severe psychological aspect. It can be very emotional. It's so distressing because, you're in your home, in and around your home, and you don't want to feel that unpleasantness, that negativity. That's probably where I helped people the most. I think I really wanted, when I was, a recurring character on 2020 on ABC News for those years. I'd fly around the country. People would write to me and say, I have a neighbor problem. And so I would go out with, my producer, and it was almost like I was correspondent, just didn't make the big bucks. I would work basically to try to resolve those problems. As for mediation, there are people who are very qualified as mediators. I'm not one of them. In fact, I'll call myself the anti-mediator, because you call a mediator in when, there's a minor dispute or there's a disagreement over this or that. I'm usually called in more when either you want to put on a TV show where everyone gets to sit back and, be entertained by, in many cases, the white trash fighting with each other. Or you reach out to me if you're an individual and your neighbor situation is just not going to get any better. And I was a consultant for some time, helping people with that. I'm shying away from doing that lately because, frankly, I'm concerned about, I find myself deferring eventually and saying, listen, I understand your story, and I know we've spent some time together, but don't spend your money on me. Go hire a lawyer. And that's ultimately what they do instead of hiring me. I'm a terrible salesman, but a great consumer reporter.
Bob, I have a question from somebody in chat.
Okay.
What about the role of HOAs?
What about the what?
The role of HOAs.
HOAs, homeowners associations.
Does it help?
They're really, yes. They can be either very helpful or very hurtful. In my experience, I haven't had an HOA for myself, but in the situations where I've worked with people and also just done basic news research, if you're on the HOA board, well, what if someone has a complaint about you? You know, are you going to step down? Even if you do sort of, or maybe not step down from the board, but maybe recuse yourself from consideration of conflict that needs resolution by the board. Well, yeah, of course you should. But here's the thing. You serve on that board with people who know you and that you know. And it's going to be kind of hard for anyone to be completely unbiased in judging, you know, what someone says you're doing, what you say you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also, you know, you don't even have to be on the board to be chummy with people on the board. So let's say, you know, in our, I'm in an HOA, you're in an HOA, and you're, you know, I'm really bugging you with my dog poop. You know, my dog poop is stinking up the backyard, and yeah, that smell's coming over into your yard. So you complain to the HOA board, and they say, "What, Bob? Okay, well, yeah, we'll talk to him. He's a good guy. You know, sure, whatever." And then you come back to, "Okay, listen, I'm going to have to make this, you know, a more formal complaint. I want a hearing on this." Sure, we talked to him, and he said he's going to not do that anymore. So I don't know what your problem is there, Buster. And in that case, the HOA is not helpful. The landlord is not helpful. The community association is not helpful. There are so many people in authority who can be helpful, and often are. I don't want to demonize them in any way. I'm just saying that it's a coin toss. You know, are you going to be treated fairly based on the situation, or are you going to be treated unfairly because a lot of HOAs are cliquey, and if you're in the club, great. If you're not in the club, not so great. You know what I mean?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Any more questions, or shall I move on?
Let's do the one on the three-pronged
Three-pronged
approach.
Yes. All right. So there's a three-pronged approach that I developed over the years. And the book, by the way, 170 pages. I still wish I could pare it down, but it was going to be 1,700 pages. So most of the time I spent writing was more editing, you know, getting rid of stuff that just, you know, I value people's time. I want people to be able to read it in a night or two. So the three-pronged approach is prevention, diplomacy, and then correction. And you wrote here, I doubt many people have considered that being an engaged neighbor and building good relationships is a big part of prevention. What do you see as those initial first steps? Let me circle back to the situation with Dave next door. Right, here's a guy in his 20s. I'm 56 now, and I've got a teenager, and I don't know. It just seems like we're going to have pretty disparate lifestyles, you know? And I said to my son, Jack, 13, I said, you know, your bedroom's right over their backyard. I don't want them, you know, partying and disturbing you. He said, so, I mean, that is certainly an awfully cool way to look at it. So I guess he's a pretty cool kid. But it also made me think, why am I not so cool anymore? I'm not going to say that I'm a bad neighbor at all, but it immediately made me think that I am doing the right thing, finally, for a change with a new neighbor. He's not going to be perfect. I'm going to hear his music sometimes. Now, you know, I've written at times, in fact, I think chapter 1 is called In the Ear of the Beholder, that what's unpleasant noise for you might be okay for me. So yeah, I don't like a loud barking dog overnight. A lot of people don't. A revving Harley, not really my favorite thing to listen to too often. Someone else's music, you know, I love music. I just don't always need to hear someone else's, especially if I can't hear my own. Construction noise, man, that has never bothered me one bit, because I love, you know, I love the trades. I love working on my own house. And, you know, I'm always very careful to not make noise. Now, I no longer live in the city where I've got party walls where, you know, there's just a layer or two of brick between you and the neighbor. Now I live in the suburbs. So, you know, the noise that I make is going to be kept inside, except for lawn mowing and leaf blowing and stuff like that. I'm always very respectful of others and, you know, don't want to disturb them. But having gone over and just made a point of being hey, how's it going, Dave? You know, hey, love what you're doing with the house. Looks really good. And I'm not looking for a best friend. And I was, and I always am, and I wish other people would be very careful to avoid a term I created for the book called premature ingratiation, where you're a new neighbor or you have a new neighbor and you want to become really close with that person communication wise immediately. And so you unload on them everything about the neighborhood. Well, that's John over there. John is such and such, and oh, he can be really a pain when it comes to this, or he's a really great guy for that. It's like that will come, And when Dave moved in, on the other side of his house is a lady. I won't get into details, but her name is Becky. Very sweet, but she's had a lot of emotional problems. Just seems to go around here on my block. And the police have been involved, and her kids have been taken away at times just because she's very emotionally unstable. I didn't tell him that. Why would I? I don't know. I guess it could be interesting, but it's gossip. It really is. Even though it's something that's true, I'm not going to poison the wells for my neighbor. Instead, one morning he sent me a text, because we exchanged phone numbers and everything, saying, did Becky come knocking on your door early this morning also? Because I saw her on my Ring camera, and I heard her just muttering something. I think she's mad at me for some reason. So, later I talked to him. I said, she's got a few issues she needs help with, and every so often, I guess it's a medication thing, whatever it is. I think it's really important that I didn't tell him that. Let him discover it on his own, and then be there to say, it's something that we all just sort of deal with. She's not dangerous or anything like that. So those would be the initial steps. Shall I move on to the next question, or are there questions?
Let's jump to the one on diversity.
Okay.
With all the current.
Let's see.
I think it's maybe three. Skip three down.
Yes. Yeah. With all the current talk about diversity, you say in your book that lifestyle diversity is at the heart of most neighbor conflicts that you've studied. Explain a little more what you mean by lifestyle diversity. The over 55 communities, they are going to be pretty quiet because people over 55 want to go someplace that's, doesn't have a bunch of screaming kids, barking dogs, stuff like that. So you have a lack of diversity there. Doesn't matter. We're not talking skin color, culture, anything like that. There's a lack of lifestyle diversity. Everyone is in it for the same reason. If you go to a college dorm, you basically have a lack of lifestyle diversity. Everyone there is young. Most of them, well, hopefully they want to study and learn. Most of them aren't against the idea of partying quite a bit. So, there's loud music, there's, romance, everything that's there for a young person. But then if you combine anyone from those two groups, there can often be problems because, and we covered this with ABC, if you're a fella, who's, let's say you're my age, and I think he was single, which I'm not, but let's just say I'm him for a minute. I've got a fraternity built next door to my house, and we got it on film, some of the ridiculous things that were going on. They were coming into his house from these parties, and these were not urban dwellings, it was suburban, so separate homes. And what an awful thing, because you're 56 and you don't want people coming into your house at all hours drunk. You don't want them peeing on your doorstep, in your backyard, in your pool, and making all this crazy noise. And then after you've complained about it, they just ratchet it up. They will retaliate. And that, again, this is not to demonize young people. At the same time, you get some young people who are next to old people, and the old people don't want to hear anything, but they're not in a 55 plus community. and they're in what's really considered often a family-friendly neighborhood, so that there are kids, and there are kids who are going to make noise, and the ball is going to land, in the yard and stuff like that. And so you see where lifestyle diversity can create issues. Doesn't have to be the end of the world. From my standpoint, any issue can be resolved, even if it does become, a protracted disagreement, conflict that could even last years. It can still be solved. It can still be fixed. Sometimes it means one side wins and the other doesn't, which again is why I say I'm not really a good mediator. I'm the anti-mediator, because I'm dealing with conflicts where, in some cases, some guy's got to go to jail if it gets that bad. So yeah, as great as diversity is in so many ways, lifestyle diversity can be a problem. Right now, my neighbor Dave, I said he's on the police force. He sleeps during the day. And so he's up at work at night. He's young, so he's got, a crappy night shift. So I'm really careful to not make all kinds of noise during the day when I know he's sleeping. And if I'm going to do, any kind of outdoor work, I'm always going to be mindful of the fact that, my neighbor is probably trying to get rest. And that I think is how we get around the lifestyle diversity issue, by just being open, being empathetic, not being a pushover, but at the same time, realizing that if you're not in a 55 plus and you're not in a college dorm or a frat house, but you're in this civilization that is integrated, that you need to be appreciative of others' feelings, be empathetic, and at the same time, mind your own neighborliness. Make sure that you're not complaining about just every little thing, but make sure that you are being the best neighbor that you can be also. Maybe that's buying, Girl Scout cookies from the neighbor's kids, even though you hate Girl Scout cookies, or whatever. Nobody hates Girl Scout cookies, so it's not a great example. But, maybe it's some Christmas bazaar stuff that, and you don't celebrate Christmas. Still buy the stuff. Just give them the money and, partake in the great stuff that is all around us in our community, in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as
Well,
time
as time is winding down,
let's
let's
jump to that
next question that
begins with
some.
Okay, some might get the impression from reading your book that if they have a bad neighbor, it is hopeless. Do you have some good success stories to share that provide some optimism? Or is the real lesson here more about us learning to accept and endure bad neighbors that live near us? I wouldn't say that it is about us enduring and accepting. I think that to a point, we need to really look at ourselves and make sure we're being reasonable. I mean, if Mimi's dog is out there barking in the middle of the day, yeah, she and I gave each other hell for some time over the overnight dog barking. But once that was resolved, I'm not going to say, okay, now don't have your dog out barking during the day. You know what I'm saying? So I need to be reasonable. It would be nice if she would be, a little bit more considerate, not of just me, but all the neighbors, because she does have a loud barking dog now. It's been years. And it's a great dog. I love all dogs. But I want to be reasonable and understand that, yeah, she did correct some of the issues. Nothing is ever hopeless. Anything can be won. I've won the various disputes that I've been in. What I do try to drive home in the book, though, is that winning is not everything. I mean, yeah, you can win a battle, but then what's left in its wake? In many cases, I can tell you what I didn't feel like I had prevailed, even though I had prevailed. It's not a winning battle. Even if you get your way, you get that neighbor to bring her dog in, or the guy behind me got his new neighbor to put out the smoky fire. And let me just go back to that one real quick, because now what you have between those two guys is almost, I don't want it not to be dramatic, but it's a little bit scorched earth. It's like, well, Dave's not going to be too interested in meeting him or, inviting him to the next barbecue. So when the problems are really, really bad and you have to win, yeah, there are ways to win. I'm just saying it's not always worth the effort, because it will put you, potentially your family, and others through a lot of psychological difficulty. It is tough. It can be tough on a marriage, it can be tough on kids when parents involve their kids in the conflict. So I guess probably the best way to answer that is no, you can always win. You can always win. You can get your way. Maybe it's going to cost you money. Maybe it's going to be building a wall or hiring a lawyer. And if you don't have money, maybe it's just you keep filing complaint after complaint until they finally back down and behave the way a community member might hope that they would. I just feel as though now I don't have a potential neighbor there. And if my neighbor knows me, maybe she knows what I do for a living. Maybe she knows I just lost my job. Maybe she knows people who could help me get a new job. There's so much positive that we can bring to each other. Maybe she sees that my kid fell in the back and he's unconscious and I'm not there, so I don't know. So she gets involved. She calls me or yells or calls 911 or something. Well, if she hates my guts, she's not going to do that. I don't know. Maybe she would. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to end with a fizzle. I'd like to end with a boom. So I guess the best way to put that is don't think that winning is everything. Yeah, you can, and it'll take it out of you, and it'll do a lot. It'll do more damage, I think, in many cases in a really serious, protracted fight than taking your losses, moving to another place, and just wish them Godspeed as you leave, and focus on what really matters in life, and that is you, your happiness, your well-being. Yeah, they messed it up, but we don't have to let them mess it up any more than they already have. We can fight or we can retreat. And if I were to go through anything like that again myself, depends on the circumstances. I don't think I would, because I'm so good now at prevention and diplomacy that I wouldn't have to get into correction. But if I really did, I probably would just retreat, sell the house, or if I'm renting somewhere, just say, hey, landlord, keep my month or two deposit. Not that I could afford to do that, but you know what I'm saying? To me, life with a bad neighbor can be so bad that I would rather leave that situation now, having been through a few conflicts, having helped people, and having seen how bad these conflicts can really get. I mean, to the point of violence. I just don't think that it's worth the fight at a certain point. It's much, much better to understand the importance of prevention, diplomacy, good citizenship, and if you get just the biggest jerk on the planet Earth, fight if you want, but don't look to me to be doing that fight for myself. I've learned.
Bob, that's a good
positive quote.
Thank you.
I am sorry about the echo today, and the challenge that we've had with that a little bit. So I know it's prevented some sort of dialogue, but if there are some people on here that have questions, you're welcome to message them to me. You have my contact information. I'm sure I could communicate some of them to Bob in some way that he might be able to get a response back to you. So that is an option. I want you to know. And then I'll just, because we're wrapping up on our time, I just want to mention a couple other things kind of as a counterbalance. We've added a program in December. Sometimes we've skipped December. But December 15th, we're going to have Patricia Plum with us. She's a counselor and a leader in a group it's actually called the International Institute for Forgiveness. and she's going to be talking about the power of forgiveness and how it can restore neighbor relationships, neighborhoods, and even communities. So that's on December 15th. It's kind of a bonus session to wrap out to finish up this year. And I mentioned we've got sessions already being lined up for 2023, and you'll see those on the regular emails that go out. So we'll wrap up today, but Bob, thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure to meet you after having read the book. And if you haven't had a chance, you might be able to find Neighbors from Hell at your local library, but you can sure find it on Amazon as well. So it's a good read on this topic. We sure appreciate you, Bob, being with us. I've got you muted. I'm sorry. All right. Thank you, Bob. All right, we'll wrap up today. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Bye.
Have a nice holiday.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Dave.
Jennifer, could you hear me okay there at the end?
Yep, we could hear you fine at the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Like that, it was having Bob's mic open. I don't know what, for whatever reason, I don't know what would cause that.
No, I'm not smart enough to know why. I'm only smart enough to know what it were. Like,
How many Zoom programs have we done? That never happens. And then happens at the inopportune times.
right. Well, and it is so frustrating when you can't like
Dialogue.
engage. Right. Yeah, when you can't engage the way you plan to. Frustrating. But Bob, you did a great job punting on that and understanding the questions, looking through the chat. And you kind of had to hold the attention, and you did a great job. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Whoops, I've got Bob on mute again. I have you on mute, Bob. I'm sorry. He's had a challenge this morning with his tech for sure, getting logged in, and everything was
There are days like that.
when he first logged on, his picture was upside down.
Oh, how do you fix that?
I don't know what he did to fix it, or even how it happened. But
Maybe he's hanging upside down right now. Oh, always something.
Always something.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bob, I will message you some follow-up information. Again, appreciate you joining us. And that last person, Jennifer, is with a group called the Hopeful Neighborhood Project in St. Louis. I might connect the two of you then, but there's some others may ask for some help too. So we'll see what comes of that. But again, sure appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. Take care.